All right, welcome back, everybody. Now we're going to change up the topic just a little bit. We're going to talk about verifiable carbon offsets and how the blockchain ties in. Now, while I don't know everything on that topic, we're going to bring somebody up who does. His name is Christian. He's going to tell us how the blockchain can tie in to carbon credits. Let's bring him up now. Give him a round of applause. Christian, welcome to the stage.
Thanks a lot. Good morning. I'll take you on a 15-minute journey to explain why blockchain could help saving the planet. It's about verifiable carbon offsets, and I'm going to present a case study or a project that we've been working on for the last 3 years. First, some facts and figures, why that market matters. What you can see here is the estimate about how the demand for voluntary carbon credits will grow over the next couple of years. What you can see right here is the volume of carbon credits that we had in 2020, okay, in gigatons. 1 gigaton is 1 billion metric tons, okay? So it's quite a big number. And the market is close to zero, not really existing. Now, this is from a study that McKinsey performed, and they've asked 3 expert panels, okay? What you can see here, which is the black bar, is a survey that they did with 700 companies that are already buying carbon credits, okay? And they've asked them, how do you see your commitment over the next decades in order to offset your emissions? And they've reported the figure in gigatons that you can see over the black bar. Then we have the orange bar, which is a task force, another expert panel that they've asked how they see actually the demand for carbon credits growing over the next couple of years. And then they've asked another task force, the Network for Greening the Financial System, and this is how they came up with those figures. And long story short, what you can see is that we will have a 15x in demand for voluntary carbon credits until 2030 and a 100x until 2050. Now I just did the math and took some figures and actually calculated what does that mean in business opportunities. And this is a 263 billion market per year by 2030 and a almost $3 trillion market by 2050. This is just crazy. I mean, if you just look at the figures in terms of potential, a future has been trading for a voluntary carbon offset, a metric ton, over the last couple of months under $10, okay? Under $10. So this is expected to rise to over $100 by 2030 and even over $200 by 2050. This is way more exciting than crypto, to be honest, if you just look at the figures and the potential. To also put that into perspective for you, is that enough to actually achieve the goals that we have in terms of climate fight? Absolutely not. So by 2030, under the Paris Agreement, carbon emissions on a global level needs to be reduced by 45%. 45%. Right now, we are expecting 56 gigatons emissions by 2030, which is way above what is needed in order to achieve that climate goal. And by 2050, we want to be net zero. That means no additional emissions of carbon offsets. So this, in my opinion, is already quite conservative. If you look into what needs to happen in order to address climate fight. However, if there's one point you want to take away from that slide, it's a big business opportunity, and it helps even saving the planet.
Sorry, can you please explain the idea between the carbon credits? Because for me, it's just another way to tax people.
Yeah, so let me go through the presentation, and maybe after that or at the end we have some time, okay? There's only a limited time frame, but good question, we're going to touch on that, okay? Now to put that into perspective, what is a gigaton? 1 gigaton is 211 million passenger vehicles, cars, okay? So it's a lot. It's 134 million households, or the entire emissions per year of Brazil and Mexico. If you better relate to another figure, it's also 200 million elephants stretching from Earth to Moon. So it's quite a lot, and this is just 1 gigaton. And we're about to emit or issue or pollute the environment by 2030 by 56 gigatons per year. So now we were speaking about carbon credits, carbon offsets, the voluntary market. So I'll quickly define that for you. A carbon credit is nothing else than, simply speaking, a right to pollute the environment. Okay? When you fly from Zurich to London, you're polluting the environment because you're flying. In order to offset your footprint and make good for the pollution, you can buy a carbon offset. Okay? You can neutralize, in fact, your flight from Zurich to London. This is a carbon credit, and also for simplicity, we also refer to that as a carbon offset. Okay? So it's the same in the presentation. And now we're only speaking about the voluntary market. The voluntary market is obviously not the mandatory market, okay? So this is a voluntary offset that you're buying in order to offset your personal emissions, okay? So the voluntary market is rather unregulated, but still, I mean, accrues to a lot of the market, and is a very important market for the next decades. Then there are already good carbon credits, and they're even better carbon credits, okay? So let's also make that a difference for you. These are, I call them good carbon credits, okay? The way it works is that you have actually avoided 1 metric ton of carbon offset somewhere else, okay? So you're supporting with your investment by buying carbon offsets another project that helps avoiding carbon credits, okay? Nonetheless, the result is the same because 1 metric ton of carbon is emitted to the atmosphere, okay? It's just avoided somewhere else. But this doesn't count into achieving net zero, okay? It's just offsetting your own balance by supporting a green project. And then there are better carbon offsets, okay? Where actually carbon in the atmosphere is absorbed by, for example, seaweed farms or reforestation, okay? That means you are supporting a project and you're buying carbon credits from a project that actively helps absorbing carbon from the air. The result is the same. Both are carbon credits that you can buy, okay? But the better carbon credit really pays into achieving net zero. That means reducing emissions by 0 by 2050. So by now you probably wonder, okay, that's cool, that's the carbon market, but when is this guy starting to speak about blockchain? Right now. So how does blockchain actually help here? Very simple, this is how the voluntary carbon market is organized and works right now, okay? It's pretty much very centralized. The way it works is there are 4 big organizations, and when you have a project, reforestation of land, a seaweed farm, or any other carbon project, you go to one of those 4 big organizations and you have your project accredited, okay? Verified, validated. They are nothing else than a rating agency for the quality of carbon projects. And it's very expensive to get the verification, okay? But then they take care and they give you a quality stamp that says this project for that specific reforestation project in South America is accredited by us. You can be sure that this is a high quality carbon offset, okay? And then after it has been verified and booked into those carbon registries, centralized databases, centralized fragmented registries, you can issue it, okay? That means you can issue it and you can sell it on the primary market, on the secondary market. There are a lot of broker, dealers, exchanges, funds that buy those carbon credits. And then eventually, ultimately, an end buyer. So the person that just flew from Zurich to London buys that carbon certificate and retires it, okay? So it actually says, look, I bought that certificate and I want to retire it. I want to claim my carbon offset and make that carbon offset invalid. So what happens? Another booking in the centralized database of these accreditation bodies. So when you just look at that, that really, gives enough examples why blockchain helps. Centralized authorities, a lot of intermediaries, fractions and frictions in trading them, no standardized projects, even a really realistic problem of double spending them. Because you could register your project, for example, with Vera, but still, sell the carbon credits without any certification on the primary market to some poor guy, okay? And blockchain could really help solving that problem. How? You don't have to understand that in detail. We've been working for 3 years on that project together with Gevo Inc. Gevo is one of the biggest SAF producers on that planet. What does SAF mean? Sustainable aviation fuel. That's biojet fuel, okay? And this is one of the biggest industries in order to offset carbon and allow for net zero flights, okay? And how does it work? I have no idea about the chemical processes in there. I don't need to, okay? But simply speaking, you take plant-based feedstock, corn, okay? You take that corn, and through some crazy stuff that they are doing, they produce out of alcohol, ethanol, jet fuel. That jet fuel can be used by Delta American Airlines to fly, okay? But it's even better because when you actually grow the corn, carbon is absorbed by the corn, and the carbon then is stored in the soil, okay? In the ground. And there it stays. So that means whilst already growing corn in the process, you absorb carbon offsets. And then they are operating so-called net zero plants, okay? That means the entire production process is net zero. The refineries use renewable energy, okay? The carbon that is being freed in cracking up, so to say, corn are also further stored. And that means in the first step, growing the ingredients, the corn, carbon is absorbed, and then net zero, without any further emissions, jet fuel is produced. Out of that process, a lot of carbon offsets are actually available and can be sold to airlines, to other polluters. One of the biggest markets that we see in the next decades. The next vertical that is really relevant for that joint venture is green hydrogen, and then renewable natural gas, okay? So again, I mean, you produce an energy source with net zero concepts and using even absorption of carbon offsets in the growing process. And this is what we do. And now, how do we put that on the blockchain? Kind of complex, to be honest, okay? Everything, the entire process, every single data point, from growing the corn, the number of acres, okay, where the farm is, the GPS coordinates, the tillage. Tillage is how often do you work on your soil? How often do you turn it around, okay? How often do you free carbon? All of that is being captured in the process. We take those input data, and on top, in order to have trustworthy data, we've established an Oracle network, okay? That means we're going to ask the farmer, can you please put into the system how much fertilizer did you use? What is the amount of tillage? What are the GPS coordinates? What is the size of your field? All of that. And then we've got the ultimate tool, beginning of this year. We can use Google satellites now. And by that, we can actually see through their satellites, is the data that the farmer has put into the system correct? Through the satellites, we can see even the level of tillage of a field. We can prove the GPS coordinates, the size of that, everything. And then also we have other IoT devices. Through the entire refinery, there are data points that we connect with our blockchain model, but also we use scales when the trucks, for example, arrive in the refinery, all of that. And then we have a third-party auditor really checking out the crop, going out there and seeing whether everything is true. All of that will be calculated through a smart contract. That smart contract then gives you the number of metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. We put some verification measures on top of that in order to ensure quality and see whether the result can actually be true. And then everything gets booked into a decentralized register where we issue the token and where it can be sold, transferred on the primary and secondary market. And you can even retire the token then through that register on the blockchain. This does the trick. This is the magic. And the challenge really is that we have, so to say, the profile of a carbon credit linked to a token. The idea is that you take a token, check on the blockchain exactly what corn has been used in order to generate the jet fuel out of that and see the entire history, the entire profile of that specific token and how it's been generated and how it works. This solves a lot of problems because you can be sure and you can look for yourself without trusting third parties that this is a high-quality carbon offset. If you had not listened so far, I'll sum it up for you. There's 3 key takeaways that I want you to remember. The first one is, whether you like saving the planet or not, from a business perspective, we are entering the carbon age, okay? The next decades, this market of carbon offsets will be the biggest business opportunity ever, even compared to crypto. The second key takeaway is when you just look at the structures that we have in the market, that all calls for using a blockchain. You have all the risk, all of the things that blockchain can actually heal. When you just remember what happens with rating agencies in 2009, what they did is they just rated garbage bonds called asset-backed securities and sold them on the market then, okay? And we have disaligned incentives. The rating agency makes money with scoring and rating projects. Of course, they have the intention to score and rate as many projects as possible. And they have intransparent standards. If all of that could just sit on the blockchain, that would be a game changer. And by that, you're cutting down the costs. What you're doing is you're democratizing access to that infrastructure. Just imagine you are a very small corn farmer, and it would be too expensive to have your project accredited. Through that platform, and by simply, entering your data, you all of a sudden could generate a new income stream by selling your carbon offsets. This is the entire idea behind that. And the last point is, now we have intransparencies, no interoperability at all on the global carbon market. How cool would it be if we had a unified infrastructure layer? For example, the Ethereum proof-of-stake chain that allows to trade a carbon offset generated from a project in South America to a polluter in Thailand with full price transparency and no frictions. Because right now, a carbon offset in Thailand, a metric ton is worth 30 cents, 5 cents, I don't know. In Europe, under $10. And just imagine that this infrastructure is accessible by all projects in the world that could really help, creating more efficient markets and helping to reach net zero by 2050. The key essence is it's not too late to actually do something, and blockchain will be one of the key drivers, in my opinion, to help achieving net zero by 2050. Thanks a lot. Sorry, I didn't get all of the question.
Can you also record in the blockchain how much wood was cut in the South America in order to start growing corn to be used for offsetting our flying habits?
Yeah, that certainly, needs to be calculated in there. Here we are working together with Labetzsch, which is an initiative of farmers in the Midwest of the US. So we don't actually have that case, okay? But in order to really have the full picture of that need to be accounted for, yes, but we don't at the moment because it's not relevant.
Token technology itself takes lots of energy. Isn't that contradicting? I see the potential, but at the same time, we probably create a lot.
Yeah, fair point. It'd be kind of hypocritic to use a proof-of-work blockchain in order to issue carbon offsets, right? Because in fact, we would be ending up offsetting operating the platform. The good thing is there are alternatives such as proof-of-stake protocols, okay? When we've started on Polygon, a proof-of-stake network consuming less energy, and now with the transition from proof-of-work to proof-of-stake, it's not that relevant anymore because the consensus mechanism of the blockchain we use drastically changed in order to reduce, carbon emissions by 99.9%.
In your opinion, why would you think that these transferable credits are more effective than carbon taxation?
I think you need both at the end, okay? So it's a mix, and now it's getting kind of in the details of how regulation should take place, and we are leaving the voluntary market and going to the mandatory market. This is a really difficult decision, so deliberately I've picked the voluntary market on that, because policymakers are discussing that the entire day, and I don't know whether the approach that we take right now is really efficient. There's so many unanswered questions. So for example, when you take a flight from Frankfurt to Denver, which regime is applicable to that flight? Are you taxed by the European tax? Does the mandatory regime of Europe apply to that, or the US regime? All of that needs to be still addressed and answered.
Are we going to make sure that, for example, in some country, if they don't want to adopt this, that basically, because the whole idea if I understood, is buy carbon credits in order to fund the companies which produce fuel which will be carbon free, right? How are we going to make sure that the countries which basically burn more kerosene in order to fly is adapting to this new fuel?
Yeah, so for the voluntary market, you can't. For the mandatory market, you can force companies to do so, okay? For the voluntary market, you can't. But what we see, though, is an increasing pressure for companies to offset some of their pollutions and reduce carbon emissions through ESG ratings. A lot of pressure is coming from the investor side in order to force companies, not legally, okay, but through investments to become greener. And this is where the voluntary market could help.
Who audits the input data? I mean, how does this verification work?
So first of all, we have the farmer, okay? The farmer is operating one Oracle, and the farmer puts in the data out of their systems, okay? Then we have different IoT devices to cross-reference and check those data. So the farmer, for example, says the tillage level was 30% or whatever, and then we check the Google satellites images and see whether that's true or not. We can actually see, I mean...
When you would have to have like multiple parties.
Absolutely, absolutely. Right now we have like the Google satellites, the farmer's input. We have mechanisms to make sure that the data is consistent through applying data models to it to see whether these input data could actually lead to that output and whether the parameters and how they relate to each other fits. And then it's planned to also have an old school auditor actually going out there and see what the level of fertilizer is in the soil. But the idea is to have even more data reference points in order to cross-check that.
I just wanted to ask, because you have it like on a consumable model, you know, like so you have a crop which is consumed and creating a token, but how is that applicable for having a tree, for instance, which constantly generates?
Yeah. Yeah, excellent. And this shows again how complex and difficult that is. So what you do is when the corn is harvested, is put onto a truck, and then is driven to the refinery, you have carbon offsets just for the corn, okay? Now what you do is you take the corn and make jet fuel out of that. So in this project, it works that the carbon offsets the farmer has will be transferred together with the physical good, the corn, to Gevo. Gevo then, so to say, retires those carbon offsets, deletes them, and uses that inlet carbon offset in order to generate offset or outlet carbon offsets that include the amount of carbon absorbed already in growing the corn. For trees, it's even easier because every year that specific tree absorbs carbon and you have your carbon offsets, okay? But when you take a physical good that's absorbing carbon and you do something with that, that again creates carbon offsets, all of the metric and the relations to each other change, and that needs to be factored in that model. Yeah.
So I have two questions. One is, how big is the voluntary market today?
In 2020, it was 0.1 gigatons. By 2030, it's expected to be 15x of that, and by 2050, 100x of that.
And in numbers, US dollars?
Sorry, say it again.
In US dollars, that's how much?
Right now, for the last couple of months, a future contract for the voluntary market was trading below $10, okay? But we did the calculation on the first slide for the 2050 scenario and 2030 scenario. I think it was 300 billion by 2030 and $3 trillion by 2050. Yeah, that's exactly that slide.
The other question is, if someone has a tree in their garden, could they also potentially start getting money for that?
Excellent question. There are no specific rules actually applied to that. I kind of think it's not right to use a resource that's already existing and is already there to absorb carbon in order to sell those certificates, because, I mean, that tree would anyway absorb the carbon. However, if you look at, I don't know, forests in South America that are threatened, okay, it makes sense to, again, protect already resources that are there. And I feel way more comfortable issuing a carbon certificate on an endangered forest in South America than on your tree in your personal garden, okay? But where it's getting interesting is when you reforest, okay? Reforestation, that's something where you build up resources to additionally absorb carbons. And those projects definitely, I mean, should be entitled once the trees are big enough to then lead to carbon offsets that can be sold.
I mean, the impact would be huge, right? Because you democratize on the supply side as well. And if maybe you have one tree, okay, it's already existing, but then you might be incentivized to plant 10 other trees. So you also achieve your goal.
Absolutely, and why not? I mean, if you have a small forest, then we can use the data, even the GPS coordinates, and use the satellite data to verify the size of that forest. I mean, why not issue carbon offsets for that specific asset? It's still helping. Then the question is that carbon offset priced and qualified in the same way that a carbon offset is priced that actually, I mean, additionally absorbs carbon because it's a newly planted tree? So right now we are pretty much in isolation and tackling the US market, which is simply because Gevo is based in US, although they're selling SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, to global airlines. But it's kind of difficult actually tackling all the different markets because regulation is a pain. We're now even spending a lot of time and thoughts on how is that tokenized carbon offset issued in the US regulated? Is it a security or is it, like in Switzerland, a utility token? And you have to look for every single jurisdiction. And then you also have the point that, for example, using plant-based feedstock is a no-go in the European Union. It doesn't work. In the US, it works, okay? In the European Union, it's almost, I mean, because of political reasons, impossible to have big amounts of corn and create ethanol and biojet fuel out of that, right? Therefore, in the European Union, you have, for example, green hydrogen or renewable natural gas, okay? So you're also then not dealing with different jurisdictions and different accreditation models, but also different resources, okay? And that makes it very difficult, but the plan is clear to tackle one market after another.
How will this affect the lumber industry and actually the industry which is using lumber to actually produce all the products? Will this then, they also have to comply and basically, because I see a lot of cost extra in this industry in order to...
So the way that, I mean, most of the organizations and people work is you have to give them a financial incentive, okay, to behave in a climate protecting way. That's simply, I mean, the truth. And as long as you don't give them an incentive to not cut down the tree, but rather keep it because it's producing more money by just simply keeping that tree instead of cutting it down, only then people will behave in a way that's serving nature. That's my opinion, or most of the people in organizations. Right now, we don't have that infrastructure. And this is what we're actually planning to build, okay? A model that is so easy accessible for even a forest owner with a very tiny forest to generate carbon offsets out there and give them a financial incentive to not cut down that tree, because every year, for example, it gives them $10, and cutting them down gives them once $20. And this is where we need to head, but we are very, very far away from that, in my opinion. Okay, then, thanks a lot.